In 2023, Los Angeles County paid nearly $20 million to one black family, the Bruce family, to buy back beachfront land the government had seized from them in 1924. It took 99 years and a national campaign for one family to get a receipt. Now ask yourself how many families never got one. You've been taught that historic black towns were rare, that they were tiny, and that they simply faded away. That word, faded, is doing a lot of dishonest work. Towns don't fade. Towns get bypassed, bought out, condemned, flooded, and in the worst cases, burned. What if the real story of these places isn't that they failed, but that they worked so well somebody decided they had to go? Today we're counting down 12 black towns that built banks, airports, hospitals, and whole economies from nothing. And then we're answering the question other videos dodge. Why were they erased? You'll meet the town that built America's first black-owned airport and helped launch a generation of legendary pilots. You'll stand in the middle of Central Park, directly on top of a buried village most visitors have never heard of. And you'll get the true timeline behind the most viral lake in America, because the version you've seen online is wrong. Think you know this history? Stick around, because one of the biggest videos on this topic crowned the wrong town as America's first, and we're fixing that in about 60 seconds. Subscribe if you like your history with receipts, named sources, and edition years. It's cheaper than a textbook, and it corrects itself. Let's break it down. Number 12, New Philadelphia, Illinois. Here's a man your history class owes you. Frank McWhorter was born enslaved, ran a saltpeter operation on the side, bought his wife's freedom, then his own, and went on to purchase 16 family members out of slavery. He even left money in his will to free more relatives after he died in 1854. People called him Free Frank, and he earned every letter of that name. In 1836, Free Frank paid the federal government $100 for 80 acres in Pike County, Illinois, drew up a street grid, and filed the paperwork. That made New Philadelphia the first town in the United States legally platted and registered by an African American. In December of 2022, the National Park Service made it the 424th unit of the National Park System. And here's your first correction of the day. Other channels hand out the title of First Black Town like candy, and they keep giving it to different places. Precision matters. New Philadelphia was the first platted in 1836. Brooklyn, Illinois was the oldest to incorporate in 1873. Eatonville, Florida, from 1887, is the oldest survivor still governing itself today. 3 towns, 3 separate records, and now you know all of them. So why did New Philadelphia vanish? In 1869, the railroad drew its line around the town instead of through it. No tracks meant no trade. The man who outnegotiated slavery built a town that couldn't outrun a surveyor with a ruler and a budget meeting. Would you have stayed after the railroad passed you by, or followed the tracks? Yes for stay, no for follow. Drop it in the comments. And tap like if Free Frank just became your favorite person in this entire video, because the next town didn't wait for anyone's tracks. It built a runway instead. Number 11, Robbins, Illinois. One small suburb south of Chicago gave the world Nichelle Nichols, who played Star Trek's Lieutenant Uhura, plus basketball champion Dwyane Wade and actress Keke Palmer. If Robbins collected royalties on talent, it could pave its streets in gold. The village incorporated on December 14, 1917, with Thomas Keller as its first mayor, making it one of the oldest black-governed municipalities in the North. Population peaked at 9,641 in 1970. Today it sits at 4,629, per the 2020 census. Now for the crown jewel. Around 1931, the Challenger Air Pilots Association, led by Cornelius Coffey, John Robinson, and Janet Harmon Bragg, built the first black-owned and operated airport in America, right here in Robbins. When white flying schools shut their doors, these pilots built their own runway, hangar and all. That training lineage feeds directly into the story that produced the Tuskegee Airmen. Read that chapter of aviation history, and you keep finding Robbins in the footnotes, quietly holding the door open. So what happened? The factories left, the tax base followed, and Robbins sits in the Midlothian Creek floodplain, which means the town flooded again and again, while bigger suburbs upstream collected the drainage projects. Somewhere along the way, regional planners discovered that water runs downhill, and apparently funding does too. Like this video, if a town that helped launch black aviation deserves better than a drainage ditch. And from a founder who built a runway, we go to a founder who built a town at the end of a 2,000-mile walk. Number 10, Blackdom, New Mexico. Family history says Frank Boyer traveled close to 2,000 miles from Georgia to New Mexico, much of it on foot, working odd jobs along the way, because his father had told him stories about free land out west. Whether every mile of that walk is literal or legend, the town he built at the end of it was completely real. In 1903, Boyer, his wife Ella, and 11 other founders incorporated Blackdom about 20 miles south of Roswell. By around 1908, the settlement had grown to roughly 300 people, with a school, a post office, and homesteads spreading across the high desert. In 1920, residents even formed the Blackdom Oil Company and leased more than 4,200 acres to drillers. Then the sky quit. Drought set in around 1916, and in New Mexico, rain isn't weather, it's infrastructure. Wells failed, the water table dropped, and no territorial water board was rushing out to rescue a black homestead colony. By the late 1920s, Blackdom stood empty. Today, 2 concrete cornerstones remain in the scrub, which is still more permanence than the rainfall ever offered anybody out there. Picture it anyway. A schoolhouse bell ringing across the desert morning, rows of dry farmed crops holding the line against the horizon, and 300 people betting everything on the idea that ownership could outlast the weather. Comment the word cornerstone if you would have made that bet. Up next, the town where an American president left the ground for the very first time. Number 9. Kinloch, Missouri. In October of 1910, Theodore Roosevelt climbed into a rickety biplane at Kinloch Field and became the first American president to fly in an airplane. He had left office the year before, but the record stuck. The town most maps ignore is where the presidency got wings. Kinloch also raised Congresswoman Maxine Waters, comedian Dick Gregory, and actress Jennifer Lewis. That is a serious talent pipeline for a couple of square miles. The community dates back to the 1890s, and on August 20th, 1948, Kinloch became Missouri's first incorporated black city. With its own schools, churches, businesses, and city hall. Population peaked at 6,501 in 1960. Today, 263 people live there. That is not a typo, and the cause was not a hurricane or a mob, it was the airport next door. Starting in the 1980s, St. Louis Lambert Airport bought out more than 1,000 homes for noise abatement. And between 1990 and 2000, Kinloch lost roughly 8 out of every 10 residents. The runway expansion that justified it all mostly never materialized, which is the government equivalent of demolishing your kitchen for a renovation nobody ever starts. The buyouts were legal, the checks cleared, the community still disappeared. Erasure doesn't always look like a torch. Sometimes it looks like an appraisal form. Share this entry with a friend who grew up somewhere that no longer exists. They'll understand it instantly. And from a town undone by an airport, we ride to a town so impressive that a president ordered his train to stop and admire it. Number 8. Mound Bayou, Mississippi. In 1908, President Theodore Roosevelt ordered his train to make a special stop in the Mississippi Delta just to see one town. From the platform, he called Mound Bayou an object lesson full of hope. The nickname that stuck was the Jewel of the Delta, and the town still wears it today. Mound Bayou was founded in 1887 by Isaiah Montgomery and Benjamin Green, cousins who had been enslaved by Joseph Davis, the brother of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Sit with that timeline. Within a single generation, men once held on a Davis plantation were running their own municipality. At its height, the town supported dozens of businesses, 3 cotton gins, a black-owned bank, a Carnegie-funded library, and, in 1942, Taborian Hospital, one of the only modern hospitals in the region built for black patients. Civil rights leaders like Medgar Evers came through Mound Bayou early in their careers, because it was one of the few places in Mississippi where organizing didn't cost you your job. And it was not a fluke. Buxton, Iowa was a majority black coal town with equal pay across race by 1905, a fact some videos quietly round down to a percentage. The pattern was always bigger than one miracle town, so why did the jewel dim? Cotton collapsed, mechanization gutted Delta jobs, and the Great Migration pulled families north toward wages. Mound Bayou survives today with around 1,000 residents, smaller but stubborn, which in the Delta counts as a superpower. Picture this: a brick bank building on a quiet main street, heat shimmering off the cotton flats, and a train platform where a president once stood applauding. Subscribe if you want history that names its sources out loud, and comment the word jewel if Mound Bayou was new to you. Because the next island community wasn't erased by an economy. It was erased by its own state government, on purpose, and this one is hard to hear. Number 7. Malaga Island, Maine. I'm setting the humor aside for this one, because what happened on Malaga Island deserves to be told plainly. Malaga is a small island in Casco Bay, settled in the 1860s by a mixed-race fishing community, many of them descendants of a black sailor named Benjamin Darling. By the early 1900s, about 45 people lived there, fishing, farming small plots, and raising families. Poor in money, rich in self-sufficiency. For years, newspapers described the islanders in ugly, dehumanizing terms. And the state came to see Malaga as an embarrassment to Maine's tourism image. On July 1st, 1912, Maine evicted every single resident. 8 islanders were committed to the Maine School for the Feeble-Minded, an institution whose name tells you everything about that era's idea of mercy. The state then exhumed the island's cemetery, placed the remains of about 17 people into 5 caskets, and reburied them on the grounds of that same institution. The island itself was purchased by the state for $400. Some families dismantled their own houses, floated them across the water, and rebuilt on the mainland. carrying their homes away board by board rather than let the state take those too. Nearly a century later, in 2010, Governor John Baldacci stood on the island and delivered a formal apology on behalf of Maine. Malaga is now an uninhabited preserve, listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Nobody profits from remembering this story, which is exactly why it went untold for so long. If this is the first time you're hearing it, share this video with one person, so the silence doesn't get another 100 years. Next, a village erased by the very agency that exists to preserve history. Number 6. Fazendaville, Louisiana. In 2021, National Park Service rangers walking the Chalmette battlefield noticed something strange blooming in the grass. Louisiana irises and crinum lilies growing in tidy rows where no garden should be. Those flowers were planted by people whose village the government erased, and they have kept coming up ever since. Fazendaville was founded around 1867 by newly emancipated families on a narrow strip of land in St. Bernard Parish, right beside the site of the Battle of New Orleans. For nearly a century, the village, as residents called it, had homes, a church, a school, and benevolent societies that buried the dead and supported the sick. Then the anniversary came calling. In the early 1960s, the Park Service decided the battlefield should be whole for the 150th anniversary of the battle, and Fazendaville was sitting on the view. The land was taken through eminent domain, and by 1964, the entire village had been razed. Most families relocated to the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans. The federal government demolished a living community to improve the sightlines of a battle fought half a century before those houses were even built. Somewhere, a planning office looked at a 100-year-old village and filed it under lawn obstruction. The descendants still hold reunions. And every spring, the irises push up through the battlefield grass, marking exactly where the houses stood. A garden outlasting a government decision. Comment yes or no. Should the Park Service put Fazendaville back on the map with a full memorial? Because the next community was also taken by the federal government, except they got 3 weeks' notice and a fraction of the price. Number 5. Harris Neck, Georgia. Today, Harris Neck is a national wildlife refuge where about 350 bird species nest in protected peace. Egrets, wood storks, herons. The birds are allowed to stay. The families who own the land are not. Sit with that arrangement for a moment. After the Civil War, land on this stretch of Georgia coast was deeded to freedmen and women, and their Gullah Geechee descendants built a self-sufficient community, roughly 75 families farming, fishing, and harvesting oysters on land their grandparents had earned. Then came July of 1942. The federal government condemned 2,687 acres to build an Army airfield for the war effort and gave residents about 3 weeks to leave homes their families had held for generations. Here's the number that turns this from wartime necessity into something else. According to a 1985 federal report, black landowners were paid an average of $26.90 per acre. White landowners nearby averaged $37.31. Same war, same county, different math. And after the war ended, the land was never returned. It passed to the county, then back to the federal government, and in 1962, it became the Wildlife Refuge. Descendants have petitioned for the land for decades, most recently carrying their case to the White House in 2024. So far, the wood storks have better legal standing than the heirs. Like this video if you think wartime borrowing should come with wartime returning. And stay with me, because the next vanished neighborhood is hiding beneath the most famous park in the United States, and millions of people walk over it every single year. Number 4. Seneca Village, New York. Somewhere between the playgrounds and picnic blankets on the west side of Central Park, around the level of 85th Street, you are walking on top of a village. Not a metaphorical one, an actual village with churches, homes, and gardens buried beneath America's most famous lawn. Seneca Village began in 1825 when a shoeshiner named Andrew Williams bought 3 lots of land far uptown, back when this was open countryside. Other black families followed within days. By the New York State Census of 1855, the village held about 264 residents with 3 churches, a school, and roughly 50 homes. And here's the detail that made it powerful. New York required black men to own $250 in property before they could vote. In Seneca Village, they could actually clear that bar. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a voting block with deeds. Then the city decided it needed a park. The Central Park Act passed in 1853. The land was taken through eminent domain, and by 1857, every resident was gone. Newspapers of the day dismissed the village as a shantytown, which is what you call somebody's home once you've already decided to bulldoze it. The city wanted a scenic meadow, and a community of landowners and voters happened to be standing where the picnic was supposed to go. For a century and a half, the story simply vanished. Then in 2011, archaeologists opened the ground and found stone foundations, a child's shoe, teacups, the ordinary furniture of erased lives. Picture this: a summer afternoon in Central Park, kite strings and food carts, and 2 feet below the grass, the outline of a church where free New Yorkers once voted their conscience. Subscribe if you'll never look at that lawn the same way again. And comment below if you've ever picnicked on that exact spot without knowing. From here to number 1, the stories get heavier and they matter more. Number 3, Oscarville, Georgia, and the truth about Lake Lanier. You've probably seen the videos. Lake Lanier, the most haunted lake in America, supposedly built on top of a drowned black town. That story is half true, and the half that's wrong matters, so let's fix the record with dates. Before 1912, Forsyth County, Georgia was home to about 1,100 black residents, including 58 black landowners, many centered around the farming community of Oscarville. They grew cotton, owned property, and built churches in a county that was about to decide they could not stay. In September of 1912, after a young white woman was attacked and later died, accusations fell on black men. One was lynched by a mob before any trial. 2 teenagers were convicted and hanged in front of crowds numbering in the thousands. And then came the part that erased a community. Night riders moved farm to farm with torches and gunfire, and within weeks, nearly all 1,100 black residents had been driven out of Forsyth County entirely. Land was abandoned or sold under duress for a fraction of its worth. Most families never received fair value, and most never returned. Now, the correction. Lake Lanier did not exist until Buford Dam was completed in 1956, 44 years later. The lake was built for Atlanta's water supply and flood control, and yes, it flooded farmland, old structures, and cemeteries, including land where Oscarville once stood. But the community was not drowned. It was expelled at gunpoint 4 decades before the water arrived. Saying the lake destroyed Oscarville lets the mob off the hook, and the mob is the story. That is the debunk, and per the Atlanta History Center's Forsyth County research, it is not a close call. One more date. Forsyth County remained almost entirely white for 75 years afterward. When civil rights marchers arrived in January of 1987, they were met with rocks and slurs, and the follow-up Brotherhood March drew about 20,000 people, the largest Southern civil rights gathering since Dr. King's funeral. That march happened within living memory. This is not ancient history. Had you heard the real timeline before today? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you first heard the lake version, because tracking how these stories get bent is half the reason this channel exists. The next town's story was nearly erased twice, once by fire and once by silence. Number 2, Rosewood, Florida. In 1994, the state of Florida did something no state had done before. It passed a law admitting it had failed to protect its own citizens 71 years earlier, and it paid for that failure. To understand why, you need the first week of January, 1923. Rosewood was a small, largely self-sufficient black town in Levy County, with 3 churches, a school, a Masonic hall, and families who owned their land and worked at the nearby cedar mill. By most accounts, they lived quietly alongside the neighboring white mill town of Sumner. On January 1st, 1923, a white woman in Sumner claimed she had been assaulted by a black man. Over the following week, white mobs, some traveling in from other counties, descended on Rosewood. Homes were burned one by one. Residents fled into the winter swamps, mothers hiding children in the water and underbrush for days. 2 white train conductors, John and William Bryce, ran their train slowly through the area and evacuated survivors. By January 8th, Rosewood was gone. Every black home and church burned. The town was never rebuilt. The official study commissioned by the Florida legislature in 1993 documented at least 8 deaths, 6 black victims and 2 white attackers, while survivor accounts put the true toll far higher. The survivors themselves stayed silent for decades, many out of fear, until journalists and descendants brought the story back into the light in the 1980s. Then came the reckoning. In May of 1994, Florida passed House Bill 591, a $2.1 million compensation package. 9 elderly survivors received $150,000 each. A $500,000 fund went to families who lost property, and a scholarship program was created for Rosewood descendants. It remains one of the only times any American government has paid reparations for racial violence. If you take one thing from this entry, take this: the silence lasted longer than the fire. Share this video with someone who has never heard the word Rosewood and let the remembering outlast both. Because our number 1 built the most famous black economy in American history and lost it in 18 hours. Number 1, Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street. Start with what was there, because what was there is the entire point. By 1921, the Greenwood district of Tulsa held about 10,000 residents and, according to research compiled for the National Bureau of Economic Research, 191 businesses. Grocers, tailors, doctors, lawyers, newspapers, 2 schools, a library, a hospital, hotels, and theaters. It earned the name History Remembers, Black Wall Street. A dollar earned in Greenwood could pass through Greenwood hands many times before it ever left the neighborhood. On May 31st and June 1st of 1921, all of it was destroyed. After a black teenager named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white elevator operator, an armed white mob. thousands strong and in some cases deputized and armed by city officials, attacked Greenwood. Over roughly 18 hours, 35 square blocks were burned to the ground. 1,256 homes were destroyed, and hundreds more were looted. Around 9,000 people were left homeless, many spending the following winter in tents. Eyewitnesses describe planes circling overhead and dropping burning debris. The death toll depends on who was allowed to count. The official state record listed 36 dead. The Oklahoma Commission that re-examined the massacre in 2001 estimated the true number may reach 300. Property losses were filed at about $1.5 million in 1921 currency, more than $25 million in today's money. And insurance companies denied claim after claim by pointing to riot exclusion clauses. The victims were billed for their own destruction, and then Greenwood was erased a second time. The district rebuilt itself within a few years, brick by brick, which may be the most defiant fact in this entire video. But in the 1960s, urban renewal arrived, and Interstate 244 was routed directly through the heart of rebuilt Greenwood, taking by law what the mob had taken by fire. So let's answer the question in the title. Why were these towns erased? 12 towns, one pattern. When the tool was violence, it was a mob. When the tool was law, it was eminent domain, a condemnation notice, an appraisal, a highway map. When the tool was neglect, it was a floodplain, a denied claim, a bypassed rail line. Different instruments, same melody. The land and the wealth were treated as available for the taking. These towns were not lost. The word lost implies an accident. They were taken. Picture this and hold it. Greenwood Avenue today. Brick storefronts rebuilt by survivors, a highway overpass shadowing the street, and bronze plaques set into the sidewalk naming the businesses that stood there in 1921. People walk over them every day without looking down. You'll look down now? One last thing before you go. Here's the thesis in a single line. These towns were not lost. They were taken, and the difference between those two words is the whole story of this video. But here's the other half. Rosewood got a compensation law. The Bruce family got their land back and sold it on their own terms for nearly $20 million. Harris Neck descendants are still petitioning the White House, Fazendeville families still hold reunions, and their flowers still come up through government grass every spring. Erasure only wins when the remembering stops, so do your part in 10 seconds. Like this video so the algorithm shows these 12 towns to somebody who has never heard of a single one. Subscribe, because we keep digging up the chapters your textbook skipped with sources named out loud. And share this with the friend who still thinks Lake Lanier is the whole story. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and never let anybody else pick your map.